First item on our agenda is the roll call. Madam Secretary.
Michael Boyd.
Here.
Timothy Connor advised us he would be absent. Jack Corbett. Mike Goodman also advised he would be absent. Lorraine Cornell.
I am here.
Mark Langello.
Here.
Anthony Lombardo.
Here.
And we do have a quorum.
Okay. We'd like to invite you to stand and join us as we pledge the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item number 3 is an application, application 3179, an application for a special exception in the agricultural district. This is also an item that's continued from our last meeting. Mr. Mingle.
Your microphone's not. If we can take a quick moment to do microphone checks here, if you don't mind, turning them on and then seeing if they, and I'll ask upstairs, I think are.
Yep, sorry about that. I missed one.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Application 3179, special exception in the AC district, and this was continued from our last meeting.
Mr. Mingle, excuse me just a second. This is
Yes,
also a quasi-judicial item.
Yes, sir.
Requiring some disclosure of communication. Any member of the board have anything to disclose before we start? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Mingle.
Thank you, sir. And I have some additional items. You've received those for you. They were waiting when you came in. And so there were some map items. We had sent out separately through an email from the applicant an alternate route graphic that shows some 415 feet further to the east and kind of southeast from the proposed entrance onto County Road 13, the alternate access. And then you had a further piece that was also from the applicant that's landscape in fashion, and it shows potential wetlands. What the question was that prompted that graphic is, had there been other considerations of access? If you recall from our last meeting, the question was, could this be moved further away from Espanola, further away from residences that are there, so as to kind of decrease those impacts that are associated with the truck traffic principally that would come from the utilization of the site for soil extraction. So you're going to have these trucks that are going to go by, the dump trucks that will potentially very frequently in number, and so pulling them further away from the residences was what the desire was. And so skipping through those PowerPoint slides that I had before, and again, the wetlands map showing basically what you see with that horizontal map. And so you'll see that consistency, potential wetland there closer to the north end of the site, northeast portion, potential wetland to the south that would eliminate those areas from an access point. And then the pit itself, the schematic for the pit, and then this graphic that we're talking about submitted by the applicant with their alternate route. And so making that turn before they get to the corner parcel, and then some 415 feet further to the east and south from that proposed access is what they've offered. We had also looked, and you'll see on the larger letter size handout, we had, as staff, gone out and looked at this access at Road 55 is how it's labeled, and that is a gated access. Looks to be a logging road. Maybe the applicant can speak more directly to why that cannot work. I believe the reason was that it would cause wear and tear on their vehicles because of the truck traffic going down the dirt roads, and I'll let them talk more about that specifically. I think there was also a question about how much material would come out of the site, and that was included in the last page of the letter from Matthews Design Group specific to this. And I can't remember the cubic yards of material. I think it was estimated as many as 50 trucks a day would be utilizing the Hall Road, though was what was stated. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close. Again, staff's recommendation was that the criteria had been met, and I do have those specific criteria from last time. I won't read those into the record this time, but there are those 8 criteria pertaining to the operation on the site, and I would again submit those for the record, and along with staff's report. This additional information, again, the applicant is present for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, if the applications, or the applicant's present wishes to make a statement, please come forward. Just state your name for the record. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Shannon Acevedo with Matthews Design Group for the record. And just as what was shown, I've spoken with the client, and the client is here today if we want to discuss further options for access. But as had been mentioned, there are some potential wetlands and low-lying lands that are further south on the site. And so we have gone through a couple of different options. The one that we had presented showed the exhibit. Yes, thank you. That was the proposed exhibit. And I also have, and I think you might have gotten a copy from staff, but another exhibit that shows where those potential wetlands are. Unfortunately, we don't have a full topographic survey, so I can't give you those exact delineations. But we are open to moving that a little bit further south in order to further mitigate from where that residence is. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, or if you wish to discuss it a little bit further.
Okay, Mr. Langella.
Thank you. Shannon, right?
Yes.
So the one that you showed said 415 feet. It's pretty much a big open field right there, right? So how much further south could you go? It had the line that you had, or the thing you had a potential wetland, a bubble right over here, then another one there. Are you able to come through here somewhere?
Yes, exactly. I think the furthest south that would be feasible for the practicality of the project would be just south of that first wetland area that you see there on the northern part of the site.
So by looking at that, that's 1,500, 2,000 feet maybe? Further than where you were before?
Yeah, probably about that.
Roughly a half a mile further south. Okay. And then the other option was, and I didn't even know this had a number, but it was Road 55 on the handout that you had on the bottom. It says Road 55. Is that another option to use that road?
We did consider that option. The distance that the trucks would have to travel, it would just be infeasible for the project.
Okay.
But the clients here, if they,
How many yards were you guys going to pull out of that thing, roughly? He said it was at the end of the staff report. I just
the amount of fill,
Yeah, the amount that you're pulling out of the ground.
365,000 cubic yards.
That was pulled out compacted, right? That's what the volume was in the ground.
That's the anticipated volume, yes. And that would be about 50 trucks per day on average.
I'm guessing that if you're getting that much out, my knowledge of the dirt would be you got about a 1.3% fluff factor when you pull it out. So you're going to have about 475,000 yards to haul, divided by 18-yard trucks, 26,000 and change truckloads. That's why that much trucks and that much noise is where I was hoping you could move it as further south as you could. Mm-hmm. It would eliminate some fuel on your side, but moreover, just get the noise and, that disturbance away from them, the dust that might be every time they run down a dry road and all that.
I'm Ken Rester with Rayonier Incorporated. So, we're willing to do whatever, it takes to, and I'm assuming that the neighbor is the ones that are the most concerned. Is that right?
We had one neighbor that came, but there's other people there, and I'm in the business, so I'm not in the truck hauling business. I'm a contractor, and so I'm familiar with what this would be,
Correct.
For them. So to give them the best, peace of mind, especially from 7 a.m. to 6 a.m., 6 p.m., 6 days a week, if that noise and that truck and the dust and all that was further south down there, it just seems to be better for everybody, including yourself, ultimately. I know you got to put some dirt in there, but guess what? You're going to have, 475,000 yards. You can get some, and then it would eliminate as much, some of the fuel and turnarounds that you guys would be doing too.
Right. Did they give you any kind of indication how much further south?
I mean, your engineer was saying that you could go south of this one that said, this potential wetland somewhere in here. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
So however south you could make that's feasible, that you don't have to impact a wetland or the land doesn't happen to be a big, hole or something.
Right.
And it looks like a big grazing, but whatever.
Right, like Shannon was saying, we don't have a full delineation of it, but when you walk the land, you can tell the further south you go, the wetter it gets. It might not show up as a wetland, but just maintenance-wise, we would like to keep it more towards that hill if possible, but we don't have an issue moving it further south.
Do you think from the original road to somewhere south of here, it's at least 2,000 feet?
I can't answer that, I don't know exactly, but we'll.
Based on the 415 on that little small one. The reason why, I'm just trying to give you a number to go by. If I said you were to move it at least 2,000 feet east along County Road 13 from the current location, and then anywhere south of that or east of that, you could put it?
What if I agreed to move it in between those two wetlands right there showing up?
That'd be fine.
Okay.
It's the rest of the board too. It's just, I'm the one who brought this up. That's why I'm talking
Okay, all right,
about it.
yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't have any issue if we could keep it in between there, that'd be great.
Okay. That was my only concern.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open it up for public comment. Anybody from the public wishing to comment on this application, please come forward.
Then I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, I'll call the question. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 5 is application 3194, and it's appeal of the planning director decision in the C2 General Commercial and Shopping Center District. This also is a quasi-judicial item requiring some disclosure. Anyone on the board have anything to disclose? Seeing none, Mr. Mingle.
Yes, sir. These don't happen, thankfully, too often, and they're difficult to kind of wade through. And so this one, I've paraphrased. It's a appeal of a decision that boat storage is permitted use on a parcel where the Board of County Commissioners previously determined that boat manufacturing was a permitted use. The appeal seems to be based in part on comparison of present uses, floor area ratio, and impervious surfaces versus the proposed use. Appeal is also based on characteristics of use which are, in my opinion, not subject to planning directors' decision-making, which I guess, since it's in my opinion, is subject to appeal. And then the site plan is subject to TRC approval. And so it seems to me that a good bit of the basis of the appeal is related to the site plan specific for Hammock Harbor. And so that the grounds of the appeal seem to be that there's characteristics of the use itself that in comparison or otherwise have a greater intensity than what was there before, and hence the rationale on the part of the applicant for the appeal then to come in and say I've got issue with this and to draw that concern. For disclosure, there were, again blaming Dorian, we published one set of a staff report that lacked my analysis, and I wanted to keep it brief because these are not, I know that sounds ironic coming from me, but these are not things, these put us in a very uncomfortable position. I'm not real open to kind of defending a whole lot of this because I'm really leaving these facts to you. What my intent with my analysis was to go through and say, here's the stuff that's involved with this, and hopefully I've done that. The key part that I wanted to share more than anything else with this was the two items that I felt were in greatest conflict with what had been presented to you, the floor area ratio limitation and the impervious surface, both of which are included within our comprehensive plan. And I think that's just materially an inaccurate statement that was provided before. Those are our limits that are placed on these properties, and in this case, a commercial high-intensity property that's regardless of where it is. In this case, it's in the hammock. But that's what sets our limits. I provided that within the analysis I've given to you in the written analysis. And then with that, you've got the applicant's appeal statement. You've got my analysis, which is barely at a page. And then we leave you with the recommendation that you take this and you balance it and receive the information and then take what action you deem appropriate. And so we left it just that quick. And with that, I'll close. I'll wait any questions or comments from you. I do believe, looks like Mr. Bear is here appearing on behalf of the applicant, which is a good surprise. We didn't know that was going to happen, so welcome. And I'll close. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Barry, you have a statement?
Evening. I agree with Adam. I don't like challenging his decisions because in most cases we can work out differences and discuss the issues. I do have a presentation, some information that it's not quite Vanna White that Dennis Clark will be handing out to you here in just a moment.
Thanks, Vanna.
I think that
I think it's
Adam and I have kind of a fundamental difference as to what his authority is to make this decision and how this decision was made. In your C2 zoning, which this property is, it does not allow boat storage as a permitted use. So it's not allowed. I've got case law out of the city of Jacksonville that says just because it's similar in a zoning category, it doesn't mean that you can approve it. If it is a non-conforming use, then there's another process that has to be incorporated under, and we've attached it to our appeal, that additional non-conforming uses shall not be added. However, non-conforming use established prior to the adoption of this article may be changed to another non-conforming use of equal or improved character when approved by the planning board. This is not of equal character, and that's what we try to point out by the floor area ratio. If you look at, we've superimposed the old boat manufacturing shed, which is going to be completely demolished. So it's not a continuation of the existing structure that was approximately 200 by 25 feet, and it's being replaced by a structure that's 420 by 135 feet. So that's not a continuation of any type of existing business or non-conforming structure. It's basically a completely new enterprise that's being built on the property. So, and it's not allowed under your zoning code. So Adam's decision that we're appealing was based upon an email where he stated that when requested by the previous owner, so it wasn't even part of this application, I determined that boat storage was a related, less intensive use than boat manufacturing. Boat storage is not a listed special exception use in the C2 district, and I have determined that boat storage is less intense than the previously approved boat manufacturing and should be a permitted use within a large building on a parcel purpose-built for manufacturing boats. Well, it's not going to be in the existing large building. Large buildings can be destroyed, replaced by a new structure. And also, if you look at the approvals that the county gave for boat manufacturing there, this wasn't C-rate. I kind of got into this when we talked about the variance last time. They were limited to one boat at a time, no fiberglass. The hulls are manufactured primarily elsewhere and brought here for the final fittings of the mechanics, electronics. And I represented Trayward back when it was, not when it was started in 86, but subsequent to that on some of the issues. And they were limited to 12 parking places. We're going to have a new use, completely different use, with 120 parking spaces. So that's what the intensity came. This is not a continuation of an existing non-conforming use, and it's a use that's not permitted in this particular zoning category. And the only one that can make a determination of use, with all due respect to Adam, is the planning board. So we think that the process was wrong and the decision was wrong because this is a much more intense use. It's not similar to boat manufacturing. You're going to have a 10,000-gallon fuel tank, which you never had before. You're going to have forklifts running, 120 parking places, people coming and going more frequently than 12 employees that are coming there and building one yacht at a time. And a use that has not been in place for, I believe it's been at least 4 or 5 years since it's stopped. So our position is it's not just intensity, it's the type of use, it's the nature of the use, and it's a massive expansion of what was there, and it's not similar in nature. So that's why we're saying that the determination that boat storage is less intense than the previously approved boat manufacturing would be a permitted use. It's not a permitted use. In the case that I have is Dixon versus City of Jacksonville, where they said a hotel similar to the use that's allowed under the existing zoning, and the court said no, and they enjoined the construction of the hotel. So we don't have a problem with the restaurant, but we think that the issue here is that boat storage is not allowed under C2 without some type of rezoning, without some type of special exception or other determination other than Adam saying, I talked to the prior property owner and said boat storage would be appropriate. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yes, sir, Adam.
I have one. Mr. Bear, is the boat manufacturing a conforming or non-conforming use on this parcel?
It was a approved use by the prior county commission.
So that would make it conforming, is that correct?
Right, under limitations of 12 parking spaces, one boat at a time, no fiberglass, and daytime operations.
I don't remember those limitations going into the approval, but I just wanted to make sure, because I thought I heard you say it was non-conforming.
Well, the non-conforming use is that it would not be allowed under the existing zoning code.
Okay.
It's not listed as C2 as a permitted use.
Boat manufacturing,
Correct.
yes, sir.
So that would make
And yet
it non-conforming with the existing zoning code.
And yet the board approved it.
Yeah, for one boat, 12 parking spaces way back when.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Look at the minutes, we can provide the minutes of the planning board and county commission at the time that they're trying to protect the residential character of the neighborhood by limiting it to daytime operations and again, one boat at a time and no fiberglass like Sea-Ray.
Ms. Stengel, do you have a comment on that?
You look like you were trying to ask a question.
Well, I'm still trying to understand. So the use stopped for 4 years, right? And there was or there wasn't a special exception originally when it was the manufacturing business?
There was not.
There was not a special exception?
There was not.
Okay.
And what the request was, originally the use was limited to 2 lots. The rezoning action in 2000 expanded it to the north lot, and a portion of that north lot then retained a 40-foot buffer area as the R1 with the residential low-density rural estate to act as a natural buffer. And so it was to be a 40-foot strip beginning some 200 feet due west of A1A and then continuing to the intercoastal to remain in its natural state, with the remaining portion of that lot, I think it was lot 41, to be zoned C2 with a commercial high-intensity future land use. Purpose of that rezoning for that single lot was to allow for the expansion of Newcastle Marine.
Mr. Langella.
I have a question. I'll pose it first, Mr. Bear, if he wants to answer it, and then I'll ask Adam. So, in what zoning district is boat storage allowed? Mr.
I
Bear?
don't know.
Okay. Adam?
It's not specific. It's not specifically mentioned.
I'm assuming, we got to deal the cards that were dealt us. So we were just talking earlier tonight about the code and the deficiencies in the code. I mean, these codes aren't going to be perfect. You can't possibly list every possible thing in a code. So there's some interpretation to a code and some, you can't list every possible business. I'm sure I can go right down the middle of Palm Coast and look at businesses that are there that were never anticipated in the code, but they're similar enough to something else, you let them go in. So where would we put boat storage? I mean, let's say you would say it was going to be industrial. Are we allowing industrial on the peninsula?
No.
It's allowed in PUD, because Mr. Million, we dealt previously when I was representing Sea-Ray.
So we'd have to
He was
wait for a
representing-
PUD to come around, if that's true, to possibly get an industrial on
Or,
that would then do it.
or at least a special exception, so it goes through a full hearing process instead of a decision being made. Again, with all due respect to Adam, I know he takes his job very seriously, and he does, I don't agree with him on this issue, that it would go through a full-blown hearing process and not just a determination, okay, this is done, now this comes back to TRC for a site plan. And again, it's a major commercial intrusion in an existing residential neighborhood that if you look, and I've got the minutes from the prior Board of County Commission hearings where they're talking about non-conforming uses, and boat storage says is not a listed, and this is from back, actually this is a more recent one, but it talks about preserving the residential character. And this is a much more intensive use, so at least it would have to go through a special exception process with a full public hearing, and up to you all to make that determination if that's an appropriate use, if it's compatible with the nature of the neighborhood. I think that's what we're looking for, is that.
So is this hearing tonight then that quasi-meeting? Because in fact, that's what we're doing. We are trying to determine if that is in fact the use. Because, I understand what Mr. Bear is trying to say. However, there has to be either that decision was made by you, or we're making it tonight, or we're rescheduling the whole thing and doing it all over again, but what is the process?
A couple of arguments, I think, that have been raised internally and elsewhere. And I guess I'll start out, I'll preface that by not what you asked me, but just to defend one more time where I was heading. My intuition, my thought on this was that if you could build it, you could store it. I wasn't talking about a bigger building. I was talking about if it made sense, if you could build it, and I'm building it, then I could store that same boat in that same spot. That's what I was talking about when it was being discussed before. It wasn't talking about making a bigger building. It wasn't talking about anything else other
But
than that.
to that argument,
Yes, sir.
to play the devil's advocate, then the storage would only be the ones that you're building.
Right, it makes sense. And so then, but as to your issue and your question,
So if we're hearing this tonight, are we determining whether or not your decision was correct? And so in fact, doing I guess it would be a special exception or whatever,
No.
what would it be?
yeah, your pending request now, in the context of the application that's here, is an appeal of director's decision as boat storage being a permitted use within the C2 district on this parcel. What Mr. Bear shared is that that's overstepping the permissions that are given within the code as far as the planning director's determination. The planning director's determination is broadly construed to interpret the code, but not as to some powers that are reserved otherwise to some other entity. In this case, the planning board being able to make a determination as to the applicability of other uses in the C2 district. Part what I was asking about was that nuance on the nonconformities, that to me there's a difference there. This is not a nonconforming use. The boat manufacturing is conforming. The Board of County Commissioners made that determination. We are not to question that. And so for us now to say, oh, no, it's not allowed, it's allowed. It's a permitted use. Somebody wanted to come in and do boat manufacturing now, they could do so. The board make that determination. And so specific, again, to what you're asking, the appeal is to staff's determination, planning director's determination. I think what I'm understanding and what I would come back to say to you is that if you're adding then boat storage as a use within the C2 district, you cannot do that here.
No, that's
You don't
not.
have that application before you as a consideration. We have. Ms. Stengels asked me if we brought those before you to the board before. We've had those determinations of use before in other districts where this has similar language.
We heard
Good news, we don't have a direct
couple-
prohibition on this.
We heard one a couple meetings ago where I asked you a specific question, are we doing, and the term was pyramid zoning. So the more intense and everything below that is by de facto included in there. And your answer to me was that, and in fact, that's what you are doing. And is that sort of how you were also looking at this as well?
Yeah, if boat storage, and again, not the outside storage. Clearly, the outside storage is prohibited in the scenic A1A. Everything that's there, and I think maybe I'm out on a reach on this one also since it's not specifically listed, but you can't have the dealership. You can't have the auto dealership or the boat or RV dealership in scenic A1A. And so, again, intuitively, you would say there would be no outside storage allowed within the C2, within the scenic A1A corridor. Within a completely enclosed building, it's almost that form-based approach. If I have a box, I can build the box. I can build it within the limitations. I can do the height. I can do the setbacks. What I stick in the box is probably immaterial because I'm really not going to know what else is happening. Counter argument that's being presented is that box at some point gets too big. I got parking along with it. I got fuel. I got all this other stuff. Those are site plan issues. Right. Those are not issues related to what goes in the box. Those are issues related to the things outside the box.
Just, can I add one point, Adam? I think that warehouses are prohibited in scenic A1A also, right?
Yeah, and I'd say this isn't, warehousing is, and I mentioned that before, warehousing clearly, that's not what's going on here. That's truck traffic.
Yeah, logistics.
That's commercial warehousing. It's got an aspect that's going on there. Many warehouses, I think, I don't remember it being as clear on that. And that's not what we're talking about. But warehousing being something much different, I think, from a traffic standpoint. I cannot straight face tell you that this boat storage is analogous to a warehouse use. It clearly is not.
Comes down to maybe two questions. One, does Adam have the authority to determine what is a similar use in the C2 zoning district? If there isn't a specific use mentioned, does he have the authority to determine what is a similar use? And the reason that question exists is because the language in the code in the C2 zoning district says other commercial uses of a nature similar to those listed may be permitted upon a determination by the planning board that such use is appropriate in the C2 district. And as Adam mentioned, there have been occasions where they have a specific application process that they go through and that they bring before you to make that determination, and one was made a couple of weeks ago. The second issue is if you determine that he does have the authority through other provisions in the code or through your interpretation of this provision, was he correct? And so that's really where you're at.
So I read Chapter 1.09.02, responsibility for interpretation, and I had brought this up 6 months ago. In the event that any other question arises concerning the application of regulations, performance standards, definitions, development criteria, or any other provision of this code, the planning and zoning director shall be responsible for proper interpretation and shall look to the county comprehensive plan for guidance. Responsibility for interpretation by the planning and zoning director shall be limited to standards, regulations, and requirements of this code, but shall not be construed to include interpretation of any technical codes adopted by reference to this code, nor be constructed as overriding the responsibility given to any commission, board, or official named in other sections of this article and code. That's the whole section. So unless you're saying that the planning board specifically is the one to do that, and then I would ask that every single time we have any kind of business that's not specifically listed in there, how are we addressing this? Again, I think that there's got to be, I mean, this is specifically put in here to give him that ability to make the county function versus every single person who's going to do something. You have a cell phone sales, that's not listed in there, and so on and so forth.
I mean, ultimately, the interpretation of the code, this is your issue, not for me to decide, but, there's some general rules of construction when you're looking at statutes or regulations. And if there's a concept that the more specific provision prevails over the general. In this case, in your C2 zoning district, you do, and I'm not, it does say that if it's not listed as a permitted use, other uses may be considered, but then it goes on to state that determination is by the planning board. So that is the argument that's being made before you, is did he have that authority, or is that within your purview?
And so my question was, if we were to say, okay, he doesn't have that authority, is tonight the night as well to make that decision? Or are we supposed to reapply and do the whole thing all over again if that's what the process is?
I think that it would require coming back before you with an appropriate application. And then that would allow for a thorough discussion as to what the proposed use is and what the pros and cons are.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm not to interrupt Ms. Stengel, but I did. But sorry, I have a bad habit. But the problem, and you heard it read, the problem we're going to have with that is that you're restricted to the C2 uses that are listed. Mr. Baer touched on it. You don't have that. You have an exception by the board, whether we call it non-conforming, whatever you want to call it. It's a determination by the board that boat manufacturing was appropriate here. So that application comes in, you get it, you can't do anything with it because you're making a determination of use based on what other things are similarly listed in the C2, and boat manufacturing isn't listed in C2. You're going to be trapped. So when that application comes in, you're going to go, what do we do with this? We can do nothing. And so then the scenario then becomes, we had this kind of sidebar previously at staff level saying, okay, does this then become a uniquely Board of County Commissioners decision? Because it was a Board of County Commissioners decision before, so it doesn't blow up to that level. Maybe that's where it goes.
That was my question.
Because otherwise, your other uses as those listed, what do? We go to the SIC manual, we go and we pull that out, we're looking for industrial stuff, we don't have an industrial thing that matches. I'm not saying boat storage is industrial, I'm saying boat manufacturing is. But the board approved it, and so board approved it. Neighbors lived with it before. I get it, it was a smaller scale, big boats, few people building big boats, not a problem. Again, you can build it, you can store it, my dim interpretation, obviously, but, it's going to be hard for you to take that and make it fit when you don't have boat storage explicitly listed in C2 because it wasn't there before. It wasn't, the determination, then being that exception, was made by the board back in 2000, or even earlier.
Well, then why would it come before us? Why wouldn't it just go to the Board of County Commissioners?
Good question. And there's no mechanism right now to get that there, unless, and I'll give you the scenario here. Whatever happens here with the appeal, then has a step. And so, however it goes, and one way or the other, it's likely to go to the board. So if one folks, the appellant doesn't get their way, they're going to go to the board probably. If the applicant or the owner of the property finds out that he doesn't have what he thought he had, then it's probably going to go that way too.
Well, if we don't have the authority to make that decision, like you're talking about, or we're trapped as a board, I don't see the reason to go through that.
I don't know, well, I'm not sure that you're trapped, but I think that for purposes of tonight, you have before you a question, which is an appeal of Adam's determination relative to boat storage being a similar use. And so it's really a simple, I guess, maybe if we just focus on that issue, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with. But really, that's the issue. Did he have the authority to make that decision? And if so, was it a correct one? And based on your understanding and your interpretation of the code. Did he have the authority? And if so, is boat storage, in your understanding of the C2 zoning district, a similar use that should be allowed as a permitted use?
So
that's the issue. And if you determine that, yes, he was correct, then they have the ability to appeal to the board. If you say, no, he was not correct, then the applicant, the property owner, has the ability to appeal to the board.
Can I ask just one question of clarification from Adam? Adam, you said if you can build it, you can store it. So if they go and they're allowed to store 240 boats, would they then be allowed to build 240 boats on the property?
The boat manufacturing, and what I'll agree with you, I suppose, to the extent that it mentioned, I don't remember it mentioning, I think the minutes said that they build one boat at a time, but there was also public comment that said they were going to be building as many as 10 boats, I think, at a single year, I think was what was stated, and it wasn't addressed by the applicant at the time. So I'll again rely on form-based codes, at least, again, realizing we don't have one. But if you're working within an enclosed building, would it really make a difference if you're building 240 or 2,000 out of that building? I'm not sure if it really makes a difference. And so my feeling still is the boat manufacturing was the determination by the board. We'll leave it at that.
I just remember all the scars that we have from the Sea Ray days where that was a little bit, it wasn't what was just going on inside the building that we had to fight over for years and years. So.
And I'll give you that also, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. The mention did, just for the record, styrene was part of this discussion also. Right. And so I'll say that, when you're comparing apples and apples, they're not exactly compared here very well, because that issue raised its head when the Newcastle rezoning was mentioned, specific to the involvement of styrene, fiberglass work that was going to be involved, and it was very much downplayed as it related to Newcastle. They were working with aluminum hulls and things like that. And I'll be one more point, belittle the idea here that I'm coming up with, or at least the basis of the concept. Again, to emphasize it, I am not saying boat storage as an allowed use for outdoor storage. That is clearly prohibited within SENA K1A. So please do not feel in any way that extends beyond a building. That was what I was doing. And so in no way am I, in my mind, allowing that which is otherwise prohibited within the zoning district.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Langella.
Mr. Bear, because we already heard Ms. Danglestad, just to hear perhaps a agreeing or a disagreeing opinion. When I asked the question or posed this question about Chapter 1, she said then that the more specific, in general, there's a theory of law, the more specific would pertain.
Correct.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
So if we were to take that as the legal argument here, then the more specific, Ms. Dangle is saying that decision is ours to be made? Is that how you're reading that?
I'm trying not to advocate, really. I'm trying to tell you, I'm trying to
Do we
highlight
have,
for
do we
you-
have that section? I can at least read it.
Yeah, I have it here. I think it's an important provision of your code to be aware of that you need to evaluate as part of this process.
Yeah, because, that's what we're trying to decide tonight. If one of the questions you said was whether or not Adam has the authority, when I look at this one, which I've known in the past for years, I rely on that. But if you're saying there's something more specific that counteracts that, then I just wanted to see it.
So this is section 303.17, C2. A, paragraph talks about purpose and intent. B talks about the permitted uses. And then in paragraph 22 is a standard, which is common in codes.
Other commercial uses of a nature similar to those listed may be permitted upon determination by the planning board that such use is appropriate for the C2 district.
And Mr. Langella, if I could interrupt, also under nonconformance, the determination of use questions about nonconforming use and expansion is also specifically given to the planning board. So that's
No, I saw that, but this wasn't supposed to be for nonconforming use.
Well, I
This was a
understand.
continuation of the use that was there. This was a further definition. If I understand the way that Adam is phrasing it, he was looking that he wasn't adding another use, changing it to another different nonconforming. He was saying under that use that was there, and correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, under the use that they allowed, this is part of it. This is already part of that use. So all he was doing was saying, yep, which is why I go to number one. I think this is saying something slightly different, so I'm a little perplexed which way you really go with it, but I don't think we're determining a new use. I think he was just trying to say that was part of the nonconforming.
And the reason I brought out the nonconforming is just the intention of our learned county commissioner seems to be when it comes to a question of use, it's a planning board determination for C2 or for nonconforming or other uses in the code, that the county commission felt those were important enough that they should be determined by the planning board instead of the planning director. That's the only reason I raised that.
But Ms. Dangle, I got one other question for you then. In a proceeding, if you have to check off certain boxes, the first box would be whether or not Adam had the right to make the decision, and then if he has the right, you go to the next question. If he doesn't have the right, we don't go to the next question? Is that what you're saying? The next question is whether or not his decision was correct.
Right,
Because
right,
the decision
exactly.
to go
If you-
to correct
right, if you
is
did-
going to probably come in front of us. That's why I was asking, are we seeing this tonight, or are we going to see it again down the road?
No, I don't. I think that if you were to determine that the determination is within your purview and doesn't fall within the general provisions of Chapter 1, that would be the end of the story for this item, and you would move the appeal or
Okay.
approve the appeal, or whatever
Okay.
the word is.
Thank you. You can have this back.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask Mr. Langella to hang on to that for one more second. Sorry. May I, sir?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
So I'm reading first from the prohibited uses in the A1A scenic corridor for the C2 uses. They do list mini warehouses and commercial warehousing, and that's where the distinction was made before, commercial warehousing being that which I think generates traffic, truck traffic. So here's just to confound, I guess, maybe that's not even the right word, but our construction, and look at section B. Mr. Langella has the benefit of it. I'll read it into the record here. B, under the C2 section, I don't have the top of that part. Permitted principal uses and structures in the C2 shopping center district. No premises shall be used except for the following uses and their customary accessory uses or structures. Remember the anomaly we have here, that we have a C2 that's referred to as shopping center and general commercial and shopping center district. And the distinction there being acreage, basically, that comes into play for those. And so the part that we're reading and that we're laboring over actually is subpart 22 under B, where the preamble for B says shopping center district, that part which is shopping center. Maybe that's of debate here too, I don't know. And then 23 starts out saying in other general commercial areas, and the first thing that's there, subpart A, all uses permitted in the shopping center district. So, and then it goes on and lists those. Whether that's, I think it clouds it even more, I guess is where I'm heading, because you've got seemingly under the shopping center portion, you've got this ability for the board to come through and come up with other uses similar in nature. But no, if you're going in under general commercial, that same reservation isn't there. Unless you read 23A as saying, oh, by the way, it does include all of the previous and then these other uses along with it. But then I go to the prohibiteds in A1A, specific for A1A. You followed where I was heading there. The uses 1 through 22, 1 through 21, specifically listed, specific to shopping center. 22 saying, oh, there's other things as similarly listed as seemingly above. And then 23 comes into play with 23A, all uses permitted in the shopping center district, and then their own listing further down for 23A in alphabetized listing there, A through whatever, that's listing some more. So does 22 then say similar to 1 through 21? Or does 22 say similar to 1 through 21 plus 23, A through whatever? And so I could tell you my interpretation. It would be subject to appeal. Nobody's laughing. Tough crowd.
I got it.
We've had times before we've looked at the code. We've had difficulties with this. And so I'm not saying this is something that can't be overcome. How we defined that before. I'll also say it for the benefit of the audience, something else we've done with the hand wringing with this. Obviously, this is a problem here. I mean, this is I'll call it a spot zoning if you want to. C2, we look at the preamble, the purpose and intent section that sometimes we look at, sometimes we don't. But when we had the issue before come up for other uses, this doesn't meet the C2 requirements. Again, I'm not faulting what is done before. It is what it is. But if I start going through and parsing that language, this is not at a major intersection. This is not at a major intersection with I-95, the further part that talks about the purpose and intent. And so here I've got this thing that is unlike anything else. It doesn't make your decision any easier, as opposed to where I'm leaving all of this there for you. And if anything else, maybe you can see that maybe I wasn't too much out on my limb, too, when I'm trying to defend what I had done. But it's not an easy decision for you to make. One still, again, the decision before you now, the pending issue, the appeal, and for you then to make a decision on that.
Adam, are you saying that the A1A shopping center permitted uses, I don't know if that makes the issue easier?
I think it makes it harder.
Is boat storage arguably allowed in here? Is that what you're saying?
I'd go back to the boat manufacturing being allowed in through board action, and then the issue of boat storage likely being left to the, if you build it, they will come. It's left to the Board of County Commissioners potentially by the time we get done. Back to that idea, if it comes back to you as a determination of use, I don't think you're in the position to make that, because then seemingly your limitations are 1 through 21, not the 23A through whatever general commercial uses that are analogous. That if we're reading that as I believe you're to read it, 1 through 21 applies to your shopping center type permitted uses, 22 being that part that then fills in, backfills to the 1 through 21 and says you can do others as similarly listed above, and then 23 being unique and separate of its own.
I would think that general commercial would be really different than a shopping center connotation to any of this. But it seems like they're grouped together.
And it just seems that you got to come in here and get a special exception for
Mr. Baird? Hit over the microphone, I'm sorry.
Yes.
you got to get a special exception in the A1 scenic corridor to get a veterinarian's office, but not to put in 200-plus boat dry storage. I mean, that's the part that
Veterinarians
we
for
don't get,
RC.
because, again, the intensity of use, that something this intense, it just goes to the TRC and gets approved. There's no public hearings. There's no nothing. associated with it. That's the issue, the intensity.
I'd
That's why I
counter-
think the intensity comes back, that if this were a mini warehouse, if this were any other use, you know, a veterinarian clinic, if it was a septic tank service, if it was even the contractor previously that stored their construction equipment on this property had to come before the planning board and get a special exception. But for this type of facility, they just get approval from the planning director, with all due respect to Adam, and they go to the TRC. That's the end of the story. No determination of compatibility, no public hearings, and that's why we have a problem with this determination.
Well, we are talking about two different districts, though.
And veterinary clinics are a permitted use in C2 in the A1A district, just to make sure we're clear.
Okay.
The veterinary clinic was an RC, basically
Right.
across the
I
street.
stand
This is a
corrected on that, but it
C2
just-
zone parcel, so let's not mince words there.
Right.
It's listed under, just for the record,
Yeah, I can
23
stand-
subpart
let me
O.
put what we would require for a special exception in.
Right.
But there's other uses that are much less intense that would have to go to special exception in this particular zoning category.
Yeah.
Was the argument I was trying to make, perhaps inartfully.
Oh, yeah, we had it right.
Mr. Chairman, I have
Yes, ma'am.
some questions.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that there was a policy, was it in the comprehensive plan, about compatibility with the residential?
That was the issue that was discussed back when Newcastle came in for their rezoning, because they were taking what was the R1 and turning it into more of a commercial use, and they had to put in a 40-foot buffer that Adam talked about. So compatibility with residential was a big issue. That's why they had the limitation on number of parking spaces. And I can pull those minutes. I thought I brought them with me tonight, but I didn't bring them.
Well, in some of the other codes that I've read, boat storage is typically really frowned upon up against residential. It's just a shame that the land development code doesn't separate that use out. And I'm thinking to myself, as a planner, as a professional planner, 18 years of experience myself, I'm not sure that I would have thought that boat storage would be a use that was not similar to boat manufacturing if I was trying to fit it into a category. However, I think one thing I might have done different respectfully is taking it to the board for their determination, because it is kind of gray, and they are very different uses, manufacturing versus the boat storage. So I'm not sure where we go from here. I'm still thinking about it, but it's just too bad our land development code doesn't define boat storage and list it as this, because that's, you know, in some of the other codes that I've read, it just is not allowed up against residential anywhere. And when it is allowed in residential, it has its own listing of criteria. It has to be specially screened. It can't go over a certain height, etc. So, and there is the policy that says that the county can always defer to the planning board for their interpretation, as the attorney mentioned.
Well, let me just say, I guess we have a couple of options. As a board, we could try to determine tonight whether we think Adam acted appropriately in making that determination, or we can table this and do some research on it. What's the pleasure of the
Mr.
board?
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I think, out of due respect for the people that are here, we haven't heard from the property owner. I can see there must be a lot of people who are not the property owner as well here, and they may shed their point of view as well, and at least they didn't come to just hear us gabble all night, and at least they can maybe give us a 5th, 6th, 10th, 200th opinion. And since we're here tonight, we might as well at least hear what they have to say.
We can do that, although it's a technical decision.
I understand. I think
To be
that's why,
determined.
in particular, I thought we would hear from the person arguably most affected by it, who owns the property as well. Now, this to me is a little unusual that we're making a decision, or possibly making a decision on someone's land who may not have that same ability to speak for themselves. You know, our process normally lets them be the applicant, unless it's an appeal process that the applicant already had their hearing. And in fact, the applicant did not get a hearing on this. So,
Right. I agree. I think we can open this to the public, listen to public comments, and then, however, public comments are probably not going to be a determining factor in the decision because it's a technical decision. So we'll go ahead and open it to public comments. Anybody from the public wishing to comment on this particular item, please step forward.
Mr. Chairman, if we could just try to have them limit it to this discussion and not, as Mr. Mingle was talking about, the general site plan, the issues of gasoline storage and other things not related to the particular thing we're trying to hear tonight. If we could try to limit it to that issue.
Okay, and the particular thing we're talking about here is whether the planning director made the correct decision or is capable or should be making the decision. So this is not a discussion for the public on whether you like this facility here or think it ought to be here or whatever. This is an entirely different discussion tonight. This is a technical discussion about whether Mr. Mingle had the authority to make the decision he made.
I think this isn't about, we're making this all about Adam, and it may,
Well,
and it really, and it kind of is, but it's not. I mean, I think the way that the appeal was phrased was this decision required to be made through a change of use process?
Right.
And so maybe if we characterize it that way, it's not so much an Adam. Clearly, it's a difficult decision. We've been batting it around for a half an hour amongst ourselves. So if it were so clear cut, and if it were so obvious, we would be done by now.
Right.
So the code is not particularly clear. There are some alternative provisions that we've been discussing that could sway this either way.
Right.
So it's a complicated decision, and it's easy to see why Mr. Mingle made the decision that he did. It's also understandable why this appeal's been brought forward. So
Right.
I think hearing what everyone has to say, and then, it just really comes down to whether it's a yes or a no on your part.
Well, I agree, but my point is that we're not here this evening to discuss the emotional aspect
Right.
of neighbors to the facility and what they think about that. We're here to
Right.
discuss the technical aspect of
Correct.
the decision.
We're not here to talk about the substance of the pending site development
Right.
plan.
Or the attributes of the project.
That's
Right.
correct. That's correct. Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I say
Yes.
something
Yes,
before
sir.
we open it up to
Yes, sir.
everybody? So I personally think Adam does have the power to make decisions as our director. But are we here today to vote on if he made the right decision or not? Or are we here to figure out if he's allowed to?
I think both.
So I feel like he does have the right to make the decision, but since it's such a gray area, I think it's something that we do have to go through and figure out, and that's the main thing. I mean, I really think you do have the right to and the capability to make the decision. I think you kind of just got stuck with a really hard one and a really gray one, for that matter. So maybe it's really not a matter of if Adam has. I think if he has the power to make the decision, I think he does. As our director, I really do think he does. But can we maybe, pass that one along, because I think we all think he does have the capability to make a decision like this. But if the decision is gray or a tough one, then it comes back on us to figure out if it was the right decision or not. So is that where we're at right now? I mean, can we just get that one nailed down, and then he does have that power to make the decision. So
I think before you make a decision on this appeal, it would be helpful to hear from the public. I think that's important. And then we close the public discussion as you usually do, and then debate this. The appeal is what it is. It's an assertion that this determination was not made in the proper way.
Okay, I just want to inform the public that we're not here to discuss whether you think this would be an eyesore to the community or cause a lot of traffic or any of that type of thing. That's not what we're here for this evening to discuss. We're here technically to discuss the appeal by the owner to a decision that the county made. So with that in mind, anybody from the public wishing to come forward, please do so. And you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and board members, I was here at the last hearing, and I'd like to introduce myself again. I'm Kathy V., and I'm at 5676 North Ocean Shore Boulevard. I live to the north of the development. To me, this is the reason government exists. It's so that one person doesn't have to make a decision of this nature and of this magnitude. I believe he's fully capable of doing that. But in this case, I think there's going to be so many affected people that it's going to be better to have a board, either appointed or elected, help determine, is this the best use? And if so, and I'm not saying it isn't, what can we do to screen it, to make it better, and to make it look better? So to me, given the nature of what is being proposed, boat storage, not building one single boat, to me, it would be much better if we could have a public process to figure out, is this the best way to go? The only other thing I'd like to say is that I come from a community, I worked in government over 30 years, where a lot of this stuff gets hashed out in public. And my biggest concern all along has been that I'll make a great effort to work with Mr. Buckley and Mr. Million. They're awesome people. I've worked really well with them so far. But in 2 years, they might sell it. So whatever we can get codified in law or written down is going to make me very happy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. Mr. Mingle, I've been in your shoes.
My name is Steve Hatcher. I live in the Hammock. When I was in the workforce, I was the executive vice president and CFO for a life insurance company. And as such, I made presentations to our board of directors and was present when the board of directors had to make thorny decisions. And when we're making those decisions, they always had a written legal opinion from House counsel as to what the law was and what they should be considering in making their decision. So to me, this is something that should be based on law as opposed to personal feelings. And my thinking is that you should get a legal opinion from Flagler County House Counsel as to what the law is here and how it should be applied. It's not a belief system, it's a legal system. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would point out that Ms. Stengel is the county attorney, or she serves as a county attorney.
And I've heard the dialogue back and forth, and I frankly am confused. I think you should put together a well-reasoned opinion of this is what I recommend. And until you have that, it's what everybody here heard, which can be something from our guy, something from Adam, something from you. Who knows what goes into this thing, and you're making a legal decision, and it should be in writing.
I agree with you, and we do have the code and the land development code and stuff is in writing, But this, as has been pointed out, is kind of a gray area that we don't necessarily come up with all the time, and we're trying to make that determination. But I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi there, my name is Jan Sullivan. I also live in the Hammock. I've been a little confused because about the conversation about the appeal, because there's a phrase in the appeal that we haven't really spent much time talking about. And our appeal was based on a statement that Adam made in an email in July. When requested by the previous owner, I determined that boat storage was a related, less intensive use than boat manufacturing. Boat storage is not a listed special exception use in the C2 district, and I have determined that boat storage is less intense than the previously approved boat manufacturing and would be a permitted use, blah, blah, blah. This is hardly less intense. Boat manufacturing had one yacht that they were building with 12 employees and 12 parking lots. Or 12 spaces, thank you. This has 120 parking spaces. It will have, and to Mr. Langelo's point at the quarry or the gravel pit, this will have a fork truck running from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., hauling boats in and out, boats coming in and out of the water, cars coming in and out to get into their boat that's being moved around by the forklift, and there's going to be a restaurant. 120 parking spaces, and the restaurant open until, I don't know how late, 9 to 9. We know the fork truck and all of that boat stuff, 7 to 7. So I just don't want you to forget, as you look at this, it may be a permitted use or it may not be, but it certainly is not less intense. The restaurant, and you don't want to talk about the site plan, but the restaurant is planned to be 50 feet from Kathy's house. So there are a lot of issues with this, whether it is accepted or not. It is not less intense, which was a part of Adam's statement. Thank you very much, and thanks for the time you give to the county.
Thank you.
Dennis Clark again. I live about 1,200 feet from this development on A1A. I wanted to try to hopefully clarify one thing that was brought up before, because commercial warehousing is listed, and mini warehousing are both listed as prohibited, possibly due to the truck traffic. We're not really sure, but that's probably as good a guess as any. So instead of a few trucks a day going in and out of a warehouse, what we have is 100 cars in and out every day and a forklift running all day. I think this is not the same use as boat manufacturing, and so I just wanted to point that out. The use is not the same. Thank you.
I'm Bob Million, representing Hammock Harbor. Without getting into the emotional argument, a lot of the concern has been over intensity and has been over non-conforming use. The property is clearly zoned C2. In C2, you're allowed a certain amount of floor coverage, a certain number of uses. So, for example, a 300-seat restaurant is an approved use. We don't need to come see you. We just build it. The most intense part of this is the restaurant. The boat storage has very little traffic and very little noise. So we're talking about intensity on something that 120 parking places, they're allowed by code. The size of the building, it's allowed by code. So I'm not trying to convince you that boat storage is correct. I believe it is. But the argument that you can't have the parking and you can't have the building size is not anywhere correct. It's within the code limits. So as you're considering this, I think that you should not consider the parking or the building size, as long as it meets the site plan.
Right, I think the board understands that. Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
Yes, Gary Roberts. I live in the Hammocks. I'm an assessor by trade, and I've done a lot of planning and development in the New England area. And I can tell you that a boat storage of this size is intense. It's anything but. I mean, it'll be very intensive. And the limitations that were placed on the prior approval were placed on this approval, it wouldn't be allowed. I can't speak to whether Mr. Mengel had the authority or not. I believe he does. I just believe the decision was wrong. If you were trying to put boat storage in that building that was there and not changing it, I'd agree with him 100%. The box is there. It was approved previously. What you do inside is, I won't say irrelevant, but for the most part it is. In this case, you're talking about a massive change in use and a massive change in intensity. So I hope the board looks at that. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, could you please, over here, could you please restate your last name? I didn't get it clearly.
Roberge, R-O-B-E-R-G-E.
Thank you.
My name is Jody Bollinger, and I live 2 lots down from the Hammock. This may be water under the bridge, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. Do you think the county commissioners would have rezoned 5658 North Ocean Shore Boulevard to C2 30 years ago if they envisioned a mini St. Augustine shipyard was going to be built in the middle of a high-value residential area? The individual lots to the north and south of where Hammock Hardware is going in are valued at $335,000 by the property appraiser. At a $450,000 home, and you could easily have $800,000 invested, as evidenced by the fact that 5620 North Ocean Shore Boulevard recently sold for $940,000. The area has changed since 1989. The Flagler Land Development Code, under intent for C2 district, says such uses should be designed of sufficient dimension to satisfy all off-street parking needs and be located along major arterial streets. It is intended that such commercial areas will be located around the interchange of I-95 and Palm Coast Parkway, I-95 and State Road 100, I-95 and US 1, and along arterial roads and other suitable areas when consistent with the Flagler County Comprehensive Plan. The A1A Scenic Highway is classified by DOT as minor arterial with no major intersecting highway. That does not seem to fit the code's intent for C2 development. I just don't, I'm not going to get emotional because you don't want to hear emotional things. I tried to keep it the facts. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public wishing to make a comment? Okay, we'll close public comments and go to board discussion.
Well, I guess someone's got to dive in here. So what Anthony was saying was sort of what I was asking earlier. There's 2 questions, and if we hit no on the first one, do we proceed? Ms. Engel said no. I think if we don't proceed, it comes right back to us. Okay? So it's one way or another, and from here, you almost feel it's going to go to the county commission anyway. I want to address a couple things I heard, starting backwards. So to the last woman that was here about the C2 zoning. You know, I've been here for over 40 years, and you know, that property existed, I think, prior to our zoning. And so here was this shipyard, and there wasn't a lot there. Now, Mr. Russell had his store right next door there, and that was there, but there wasn't a lot. Whether or not they envisioned it, I could tell you that people in this county talked about this county growing up way back when I came here. This was not, you know, this wasn't a sleepy county in 1980 and 1989 that nobody thought would ever go anywhere. They all thought. I mean, Palm Coast was here. They had huge plans. So I think there was thought of it. I just think that this one kind of got stuck because this guy built this thing. What are you going to do with it? Because I'm wondering, why wasn't it zoned industrial? I mean, if it's a ship manufacturing, that's industrial. But I asked you, do we have industrial there? We don't have really industrial there. And so I think that's probably was the sort of the, sometimes political decisions aren't necessarily the, made in a county commission, aren't necessarily the ones with the most planning experience. It's the one with the most expedience. And so that seemed to be, let's just call it a C2 because we don't want to have industrial, and they just did that. But with the C2, you can have an awful lot of traffic. So the things about the cars and the stuff, that's going to happen there anyway. I understand about the forklift. I was in a business just not too long ago in Minnesota, and they had lights instead of horns. And I don't know if that's OSHA approved or not, but they had all lights. And that'd be great if they don't have to have backup horns, they could do it with lights. These were laser lights that shot, and it was inside of a facility. So maybe that's why they did it, because it would probably drive you crazy in this facility. But if you had a manufacturing facility there, just like we have at Sea Ray, those forklifts are going back and forth all day long, moving materials. There was nothing that I heard from the testimony that said it was supposed to be one boat. You could build a whole bunch of 8-foot dinghies all day long and make hundreds and hundreds of boats. You could have one big ship, and the guy did do big ships. As a matter of fact, just for full disclosure, I wanted him to build me a boat way back when. I just wanted the hull, and I was going to finish it, but I get seasick, so I didn't do it. But I think Adam's interpretation, I probably would go there. I think his interpretation, personally, I think the storage sort of fits what that was. Do I think, where else are you going to put these boats, guys? If we look at our industrial zones, where are we supposed to put these things? And I get it with the forklifts, but I know you can't have boat storage in the middle of Benel. That doesn't make sense. We don't have a business district like they have in Daytona or in St. Augustine that has a bunch of businesses right along the seafront that you could stick, industrial stuff. We don't have that. If you go to Daytona, we have that, but we don't have that in Flagler County at all. The biggest part of it is Sea Ray. That's the biggest industrial district. We already know what happened over there with doing the same exact thing that you're all worried about. They had it over there. So if boat storage, I think there's something in our code that says you can't unzone or not allow a permitted use. It has to be allowed somewhere. If something is legal, you can't make it illegal by not having zoning districts for it. And if it's not defined in the code somewhere, then it sort of falls upon us until we define it in this code where it's going to be. And by de facto, this is one of the few parcels that could even be considered, because the majority of everything else has already been zoned in a residential manner or some other fashion. There isn't going to be any boat storage. So what does that mean to everybody who has boats here? You can't store them inside when a hurricane comes by. You have to drive all the way to Volusia, St. Augustine, and a person who wants to have that legal business is not going to allow it to have it because we're not allowing the zoning for it. Just like the strip club argument, you can't say, we're going to stop strip clubs by zoning. You can't do that. You got to put them in a zoning district that would be appropriate. And again, if it's along the water, that's where you put a boat storage. And since we don't have massive amounts, but we have 2 commercial parcels, we have the hardware store and we have a boat manufacturing facility. Where else would we put it? So, the decision whether or not you have the right to have done this or was made right, I see both arguments. I just circularly get back to the same point. If we say you didn't have the right to it, then the applicant can appeal, come back, we're going to all be back here again. If we just jump over that one and make the decision one way or the other tonight, what we think about it, this is going to go back to the people who put it in the first place, which is a long ago board, but it'll go somewhere. And I just think that, so we won't keep hearing the thing. I'd rather just say that I interpret that number one being, that I read number 1.09, giving you the authority in this case. That's how I read it. And I agree with you that those other uses did not fall in there, but I think that the interpretation of whether or not, we talked about that pyramid and whether or not this use is part of the same use, I think it is. So that's sort of where I'm going. That's just my 2 cents for the record.
Any other comments from the board?
I would argue that boat storage definitely doesn't belong abutting residential, but I think it should be allowed in certain areas for sure. And I just think that you do have, I think, let's not make it personal, the planning director has the authority to make interpretations. Completely agree with that, but I think this is one that I would have deferred to the board. And the process of government and the input from Scenic A1A Pride. This is an opportunity for redevelopment. This is an opportunity for this community. So why not use the resources this community has and defer to the board in something that's a little unusual?
Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, well, I would agree that Adam does have the authority. I presume you do that all year long, make those decisions on if something is of similar use. Now, the other question, was it the right decision? Obviously, we're hammering that back and forth. It seemed like our planner, when he makes those decisions, makes the best judgment with the information he has at the time. So I don't think it was a wrong decision. I think it was logically thought out by him, and he made the best decision he could. I don't think it's, when you're in a gray area, it's not right or wrong. It's you make the best decision with what you have in front of you. So that's how I see it.
Any other comments? I'd entertain a motion. I would really entertain a motion.
We're going to be back here regardless, right?
I'm not sure what the motion is to approve or disapprove. That's
The motion is either to approve your,
the decision.
you're granting the appeal or you're denying. So you're approving the request or you're denying the request. It sounds like
Okay,
your motion would be
I know-
a
I
denial
know
of the appeal because Adam was an appropriate decision maker and made the appropriate decision.
I think, to be fair to all the people in the hammock that came out here tonight, I don't want to see you come back out here again because this is going to be ultimately somebody else's, decision. So that's why I'm jumping this gun, and I'm going to say that based on the evidence that I heard, I think that I would deny the appeal, and that the decision would stand.
We have a motion to deny the appeal. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries 4-1. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 6 on the agenda, staff comments related to anything else?
No staff comments.
Hearing none. Board comments?
None.
None. Public comments? Would you step up, identify yourself, please, ma'am?
My name's Joyce Scaff. I live at 5648 North Ocean Shore.
Uh-huh.
And I'll tell you that I'm like Kathy. You have a big responsibility here. We live in a residential area where none of you would want what is going to go on at this, and next door to us, next door to your houses. And I know that's emotional, but I'm going to tell you that I was up at 6:30 this morning. How many of you have been to our homes and sat on our front porches? Who, Adam, have you? Who has been to our houses and sat on our front porches and observed the beauty and the serenity that will be ultimately disturbed, that will be taken from us? I have $1 million invested in my home and my property. And you are saying, it's okay, we're going to allow this kind of construction to go on in this area, in a residential area. And yes, I am emotional because I think that the quality of life that we have had in Flagler County, the protection of the environment that has been, I have bragged about to my colleagues, the protection of the environment in Flagler County is wonderful. The bike trails, the natural areas. This is a residential area. You have a person that's going to have a construction right next door. You're going to have a $10,000 or 10,000 gallon gas tank right next to my neighbor. You will impede our view. You will have, and if you have heard a forklift, you said you've heard a forklift going from sunrise, they said themselves, dawn to dusk. They're allowed to run that forklift, dawn to dusk. I want you to consider that. You say you have no authority, then I wonder, I'm a taxpayer, and I'm going to tell you that the people up and down our road that pay taxes on our properties, and we pay a heck of a lot more than that one area, that one little parcel. We far outweigh taxes. And you have a responsibility to the taxpayer, and we are taxpayers.
For the members of the public, I just want to say that you do have an option, you have an avenue to appeal to the Board of County Commissioners. I'm sure your representative will be talking to you about that, and the decision, of course, has been made, and so the hearing on that item is closed.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I just bring one thing up? I just want, again, we already heard that decision, so I'm not talking about specifically that decision. I just think, and I know the woman just left, but I live in that area. I've lived there for 40 years. I live directly across the street from a C2 zone property, same as this. Right now, there's a restaurant that has music, outdoor music, and they play their rock music up into the night, and it blames right up against my house. Cars are parked up and down the road. I have everything that she's worried about having it right now. I have considerably more money than she mentioned into her property, into my property. So everything that she was concerned about, I have. So I'm not making this from someone sitting and say, well, not in my backyard. This is literally in my backyard. I've done it. I just think we have to look at all the issues. You have to look at everyone's rights on a piece of property. It's not just the neighbor's rights, it's the guy who owns the property too. And as well, if you're looking for a development that you can't do that in, you go into one of these big PUDs or whatever that specifically zones every little piece. If you're on open zone property like this, these things can happen. That's just part of life. But I just want to know, I think all the members on this board trying to make the right decision, and we're not doing this without realizing that someone's going to be upset. And I made the motion specifically because I thought that was the right thing to do. But you all, like the attorney says, you have the right to go to the county commission. That's probably where this is going to go. Those are your elected officials. That's who started this thing and probably who will end it. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned.